For those of you joining, we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay, we'll get started here. My name is Jeremy Foyet. I am a co-founder of Milwaukee. This is one of our programs, Cafe Conversation on the Cloud Cafe. Today we'll be talking about AI and the coronavirus, really how it's going to accelerate educational transformation. Our featured guest today is Brian Curry, Director of MBA at the Batterman School of Business at Concordia University, Wisconsin. Brian, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Let me share my screen. I have a couple slides. And is that showing?
Not yet. Nope. When you, as you share your slides, I'll just let everyone know today our programs are sponsored by North Shore Bank and Ginger Lazovic of Shore Rest Realty.
All right. Now it should be showing.
There you go. And you want to maximize that then.
How's that?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that delay.
No worries.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you taking time out to listen to me speak about the future of education. And going to start pretty dramatically. And let me start by saying I think we're facing a global learning crisis. Our current state of education is not where it needs to be to produce future leaders that push boundaries, disrupt industries, and embrace analytics and tackle global issues. The Boston Consulting Group recently reported that 85% of the jobs today's learners will be doing in 2013 have not even been invented yet. Imagine that, 85%. Our education system's struggling with turning out people who can do jobs today, and 85% of those jobs aren't even invented. So, going to talk a little about something that's near and dear to my heart, the MBA. And actually the MBA, it's a fascinating story that reflects political and social norms of the time during its development. And the problem is that the MBA primarily has been locked in since pre-1920. And as you can see on the slide, about 1890, what was considered to be the core of an MBA program was accounting, economics, statistics, and management science. And it really came out of primarily based on the recovery of the Civil War, right? 1863 to 1865, and then the rise of science that came out of that in about the 1890s. HR enters in right around the 1917. It was pretty much realized after World War I that psychology may actually play a role in management, and it's not just straight science that is going to make a great manager. So shortly after that comes ethics and finance. So if you look at that, accounting, economics, statistics, management science, HR, ethics, finance, this really is the core of what makes up most MBA programs across the United States and quite honestly across the world, even still today. So that's well over 100 years old. And I say across the world because one of the things that happened is after World War II, we had the US Marshall Plan. You may remember that from history class. And inside the US Marshall Plan, there was something called the United States Technical Assistance Productivity Program, or US TAP. And basically what US TAP did is it said the US will help reindustrialize Europe on the grounds that you will adopt American management and ideology methods. So US TAP funded over 24,000 European managers to visit the United States, tour our plants, and attend business school. So that's why I say this MBA core that we have has really been locked in across the globe for over 100 years. And the MBA is not the only classic in education. Here's a picture from Sanjay George, TED Talk, The Future of Education at University of North Carolina. On the left is a classroom of 1913, and on the right is a classroom of 2013. Now, Sanjay, who is the founder and CEO of Matchbook Learning, makes a great point in his TED talk that in many ways, the classroom has changed very little over the last 100 years. If you think of it, students are grouped by age, they sit in rows, a teacher lectures to the students with a very set curriculum, and they move all the students through the same pace, regardless of the individual learning styles or the mastery of a subject. So I would kind of echo Sanjan's challenge that there's very few industries that have probably changed so little in the last 100 years. So in many ways, our educational system is archaic, kind of monolithic teaching system, which has recently been stressed by a change in student population. And let me run through kind of some of that history of what's been going on. Roughly from 1970 to about the 2000s, there was steady growth in students. So a good 25 years where we just saw universities and colleges just increase with enrollment. Obviously, the main objective back then was just revenue, right? Bring in more students, gain more revenue. And the central focus was really around a group of students 18 to 22 years old, all right? And then we come to about 2002 to 2010. And there was suddenly a need to increase revenue because traditional students, they started to plateau off. And so we see the emergence of online learning. Also, institutions start realizing that they can start serving the adult population. Now, by 2010, 2016, we actually see high school graduation starts to decline. So the other interesting thing that starts around that time period is no longer is it predictable the age and the learning patterns of students. And this will become clear in a little bit as we talk some more. The other thing that happens from 2010 to 2016, 60% of undergrads do not finish in 4 years. So a multitude of colleges and universities now start entering the online delivery mode. Now, take a narrower slice about 2017 to 2019, and that traditional undergrad student, as defined as 18 to 22 years of age, full-time student, taking daytime classes, and having a residential experience where they're actually living on campus, they now only represent 30% of the market. So a vast difference from what we saw from 1970s to the 2000s. Enrollment's flat. And as a matter of fact, in many areas, you're actually seeing enrollment decrease and significant decreases. So there's obviously been a rapid change in the demographics, and that's what this slide shows. We're all very aware that there's an aging population, and you see it go from the 1990s up to the 2020s where the aging population increases. But the interesting part about this is as that population is aging, there's an increased demand for continuous learning and reskilling. And as the slide shows, 72% of the pre-retirees plan to keep working, while 58% want to enter a new line of work so they have more flexibility. And 50% see keeping up with technology is critical to improving their working ability. So a large change in the demographics we've had. Adding to this, there's been another low birth rate, which is leading to even lower graduations of high school graduations across the country. And obviously online education continues to expand, and we'll talk a little about that with COVID in a moment. So again, kind of following on this market shift that we've had, what does today's post-traditional student look like, right? These are the ones that make up 70% of the college students in today. Median age for graduate school is 33. Maybe many of you would have guessed that it was right around that. But I would predict that probably a lot of you wouldn't realize the median age for an undergraduate student is 31. So not much difference with that post-traditional undergrad and graduate student as far as age. Roughly 46% of undergrads and 51% of graduate students have children in the house. And obviously with COVID right now and being safer at home, this is a huge impact on the student population. 65% are married, whether you're undergrad or graduate. 65% of the students in that post-traditional population are married. More females enrolled at just about every level, except you get into some specialty niches, but whether it's bachelor, associate, master's, PhD, there's more females. Another interesting thing is median income. Again, in a graduate household, the median income is about $81,000. Surprisingly, though, in that undergraduate household, it's $72,000. So again, not much of a difference between those two median incomes compared, especially to a traditional undergraduate student that just has a summer job or intern job. So kind of still some of the stresses that are on the system and some of the changes that we're facing in education. First generation to enroll in graduate programs is roughly 47%, while at the undergraduate, it's 52%. So we're seeing that there's an older population that has a lot of life going on, a lot of distractions, working full-time kids, and about half the students, it's the first ones that first generation to enroll into an undergrad or graduate program. I would ask, normally we could take a poll and I would ask, what do you think the primary reason is that people are going back, enrolling in undergrad or graduate? And I would say we'd probably be about 99% in agreement, and you'd be right, it's an increase in salary. In fact, if you go through a host of other parameters between these graduate and undergraduate post-traditional students, we see there's a lot of similarities between those two populations, but a lot of dissimilarity between what really the entire higher educational system has been built around, which is an 18 to a 22-year-old student that's having a residential experience there on campus. If I was going to summarize 2020, it'd be very easy going through that history. All I'd have to say is SARS-CoV-2. That pretty much wraps up what our year has been so far and probably what will continue into this fall. So with that background, now I'd like to talk a little bit more about market disruptions and technology and how COVID kind of plays into all of this and what we're seeing. So the next slide, it just shows connectivity and analytics is certainly increasing across the globe in almost every aspect of our lives. The digital age is changing the way we engage. All of you know this, all of you experience this on a daily basis. Last year when I did this seminar on AI in education, I started out with two statements. And the first statement was, our brains are not going to advance any faster than computers. And the second statement was, we're not going to do away with cognitive technologies. In other words, artificial intelligence is going to permeate our lives and change the very nature of how we operate. I still believe that AI is a major force that will impact education. However, I'd be remiss not to discuss the obvious macro force that has strained the educational system, and that is COVID-19. Now, many of you are personally aware of the stress that COVID has placed on you. You've probably had to learn new methods in mathematics to teach your third grader, brush up on government if you have a middle school student that you're tutoring, or perhaps console a senior who will miss out on prom or graduation. We've all been thrust into this unprecedented times by a positive sense, single-stranded RNA virus belonging to a group of coronaviruses that causes respiratory tract infections, which most of us didn't know what those words were a year ago. Now they impact us on a daily basis, and these impacts are going to be far-reaching, and they're going to be permanent changes we see. Now, in a funny aside, last fall, we started in the MBA program at Concordia experimenting with Zoom in our classes. And I actually got a little bit of a slap on the hand for not considering all the pedagogical consequences. Yet this spring, when it was decided to change from face-to-face to remote, we leveraged Zoom. As a matter of fact, Concordia switched roughly 1,500 courses within a 2-week period. And the MBA program, we converted all of our courses in 3 days. So now I just a little bit about getting slapped on the hand, but I honestly have to brag what a phenomenal job Concordia did in responding to COVID, which just demonstrates what can be accomplished when the risk is worth mitigating. So if we temporarily set aside the human and the financial tragedy of COVID, then COVID really just becomes another external force in which technology stepped in to fill a large portion of that gap caused by this disruption. Right? And let's remember that this technology wasn't new technology. In fact, Zoom video communications was founded in 2011, so almost a decade ago. And it's really not surprising that the technology was ready to go. As we see from this slide, this is from Deloitte, and it's a graphical representation of how technology has been outpacing even individuals, and how technology and individuals have been truly outpacing even just the adoption of technology into businesses. And then down on curve 4, you see the public policy, how far that lags behind, right? Remember all the conversations we had about Facebook prior to COVID? So I would, if I was going to do another dot on here and I was going to say, where does higher education fall into this? I'd probably say we're somewhere between curve 3 and curve 4. So we're not quite at public policy, but we're certainly not moving as fast as some of the other businesses around. Now, last year, I made the claim that technologies such as AI are going to revolutionize learning. This year, I've told you that COVID accelerated integration of that, right? It was exemplified by Concordia putting Zoom into practice very quickly. But all this seems contradictory to my first statements that I started out talking about today, where I said the classrooms haven't changed in 100 years. So let me see if I can explain that discrepancy. And it really comes down to, despite spending a lot of money on technology in classrooms, the reality is historically, there has been relatively little measurable gains in outcomes. One of the reasons is something we call cramming. And this is a term coined by the late professor Clay Christensen. And now I wouldn't be much of a business professor if I didn't attempt to teach you a business principle. So for those of you who understand disruptive innovation, I apologize, please bear with me. Hopefully this is useful for some of you and explains why there's been a barrier to successful adoption of technology into the classroom. So Clay Christensen, probably one of the better thinkers of our times in business, came up with this innovators disruption theory, and it's kind of summarized on this graphic here. And so if we look at the x-axis, there's time, and we look at the y-axis, there's product performance. And then you notice these 3 blue parallel lines that kind of go from the lower left quadrant up to the upper right quadrant. And these lines have kind of at the top level is high end who are really willing to pay for performance, right? These are the first ones at the door waiting all night to get the latest, greatest, and really need the most powerful tool out there. Then on the bottom, there is the low end of the market. And these are the ones who really just need a product, and they don't need it to do much more than just work. And then somewhere in between is the mainstream, the bulk of the market. Now, you also see these red lines. There's incumbents and entrants. And so an incumbent is the one who actually takes over the market eventually. And you'll notice that the incumbent, when they first start their product, their product really doesn't even meet the demands of what mainstream wants. But as they continue to do continuous improvement, you see there's that crossover of the incumbent's sustaining trajectory in the mainstream. And at that point, they're satisfying most of our needs with their product. Now, as any good business, they continue to do incremental and continuous improvement. So that's why that trajectory keeps going up to the right. The reality, though, is this is what Clay Christensen found, was the reality is you've really already satisfied the mainstream of the market. So the majority of the people, they're happy with the product. And really what you're doing is driving yourself up to customers who will pay more, but it's a smaller market, right? And kind of leaving mainstream and certainly the low end of the market far behind. And so his theory says when a technology comes out, it really is somebody who's a disruptive, somebody who's outside that incumbent's company that really takes hold of that technology and starts going up and competing. Now, what the line doesn't show is eventually that entrant, they'll become part of the mainstream and they'll actually put the incumbent out of business. But the key here is to notice that they start with the low end of the market, okay? And I've got a couple examples I want to kind of talk to that may help make this a little bit more clear. They're kind of old examples, so I apologize, but hopefully they still resonate. If you can remember way back, or if you know anything about your history, remember there used to be a company called Kodak, right? Kodak was the #1 company in film. I mean, if you were doing photography, it was Kodak. Matter of fact, my wife, when she did her professional photography schooling, actually went to a Kodak satellite school. So if you were doing photography, it was Kodak. Now Kodak's that incumbent and they're going up their sustaining trajectory. They're satisfying the mainstream of public, and digital comes along. Now, Kodak knew digital was coming. Kodak had the funding to switch to digital. They even tried, but they failed. And so this is where Clay Christensen's business theory comes in and says, why did they fail? Well, they failed because every aspect of Kodak's business model is based off of film. And so this is where he's talking about cramming a new technology in there. So cramming technology such as digital into an existing business frame. Realize Kodak's supply chains, their employees, their leadership, their business models, their financial structure, everything about Kodak is done so it can sell film. So when you try to put this new technology in there, it just doesn't fit. And that's where that term cramming comes from. I'm going to give one more example. If you thought Kodak was historical, this is even more historical. Way back in the old days, probably before most of you, TVs were huge. I mean, literally, they were like half the size of a small car, and they weighed, just 100 plus pounds, very big. And they use a technology called vacuum tubes. Okay, and it literally is what it sounds like. It's a tube, a glass tube that's vacuumed out, and there's an element put in there. And you had these beautiful color pictures that were very fuzzy by today's standards. And they sold them through stores like Sears and JCPenney's. So a Japanese company comes along, Sony, and they say, we've developed something that's more rugged. It's called solid state. It's put on a chip. And it's so rugged that we think we can even make a portable TV from this. But we can't do color. We can't do the clarity that you have. There's less channels. It's fuzzier, but it's more reliable. And so they try to license it to the US companies, and RCAs, those types of companies aren't interested. They try to then sell it into Sears, and Sears says, we're not interested. And the reason Sears wasn't interested is because they were very honest with Sony. We make more money fixing the TVs than we do selling the TVs. And so Sony was forced to go to upstarts like Kmart and sell their product there. But I know this is very old, but it does show you that these supply chains are very complex, and it's very hard for an incumbent, even though they know solid state's coming or digital's coming, whatever that disruptive technology, it's really hard to penetrate your business model that you have set up. And it might not even be from within your walls, like in this case with RCA. It was literally within who was selling their TVs, Sears. Real quick, Apple did the same thing. If you think of this, on everybody's desk was an IBM, and Apple couldn't compete in the business world. IBMs were faster, more memory, cheaper, had more software available. So where did Apple go? They went into education. And it was exactly that reason. That's how they were able to get their foothold, is to go into a market that IBM didn't want to sell into, and a market that didn't have any other choice. They could take slower computers, computers that didn't offer as much software, all the lower quality that Apple had initially, because they didn't have the IBMs on their desktops. And so you see this trend over and over. And the point of all this is it's very hard for an incumbent to leverage technology to displace their own current business model. Seldom has an organization been successful in any field to achieve this ambidextrous business model where they're the incumbent and the disruptor, okay? So where does this leave us? My own personal belief is that many educational solutions have already been proposed. I mean, there's been many brilliant minds that have worked on these problems. You can pick up a book on just about any one of these or read a blog on any one of these topics on their beautiful solutions to a lot of the issues we have within education. While technology will continue to be developed, as we've shown, it's outpacing the utilization. So the reality is the technology for all these really is already available. However, like other incumbents, education has a business theory that suggests an established market-leading university will be replaced by a distributive innovator. And that's actually what I would have told you a year ago, probably even 3 months ago. This was kind of the business theory that I operated under. But I'd like to postulate something today, and I'll send you away, and I would love to have your feedback either in the question and answer session, or please email me or contact me afterwards. So here's what I postulate. COVID is an external force that could not have been considered by Clay Christensen when he developed his disruptive innovation theory. Can you imagine a year ago discussing a virus that would close down our entire economy? I just don't think we can even imagine that a year ago. And certainly there was no way Clay Christensen could have said an external force would be that powerful. So I wonder if this external force that has such a negative impact in the short term actually turns out to be the saving grace for higher education in the long term. So different than my view a year ago, I suggest that COVID may be a game changer that stimulates the incumbent to actually be their own disruptive innovator. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd take any questions that you have right now.
Thank you for that, Brian. Anybody that has any questions can now ask them in the Q&A forum, or if we're on Facebook Live, you can ask them through there. Brian, just as you kind of see colleges being able to really be online, and I guess people from anywhere could be attending Concordia. You could live in Phoenix or Barcelona or anything like that.
Right.
Do you see the bigger brands winning out then, or the bigger established type of colleges winning out in that regard? Like if it goes to a strictly or a majority digital versus in person as a traditional college with in a real estate world, do you see that as like the major disruption force, and then the bigger marketing dollars are kind of what wins out?
Yeah, great question. Certainly, I think there's going to be consolidation. You will see schools combine, and you will see schools go out of business. And the ones that are probably going to be the survivors, or some of the biggest survivors, are going to be those large schools that you're talking about. They are, they have brand, two, they have endowments, and so they're certainly going to win out. What's interesting is when you look at online students, most studies still show that online, you really still gather it's a very close network, kind of 50 miles, and then you start going out and it starts dropping off. So we do have students all over the world, but we are really concentrated kind of in that Southeast Wisconsin. I think the bigger brands that you're talking about will be a little bit larger. Here's where I think the competitive advantage works, kind of going back to what I talked about. A larger school is going to win out and take a lot of that market share because they have that brand recognition, they have the base that you're talking about, and the consolidation of the smaller ones. But it's going to be those smaller creative schools that can actually change. Like I mentioned about the MBA, it's the same MBA for the last 100 years. somebody who comes up with something clever that says this fits my lifestyle today, I think actually wins out over those big organizations and will actually eventually, disrupt them and have them go out of business. I remember the time scale is very long, but it's exactly that big school is so large that they're going to have a hard time changing. Is that
Yeah.
a question?
Yeah, it does. I just like, think of the big, like, let's just see University of Michigan because you have Ann Arbor on here.
Yes.
You know, and their business school is huge. And I don't know how many people go to the business. I think it's like 100,000 go to University of Michigan or something like
Right.
total, right?
Right.
Or some crazy number. Or like University of Texas has, I think, 100,000 students or roughly around that. They could have 500,000 students. They could have 2 million students. Where does that put other universities if that's the way, if that's the route it ends up going, is kind of where I was getting at there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of that. Where the big schools, those University of Texas, University of Michigan, and their phenomenal programs. They are going to grab a lot of the market share. They are going to be the survivors. There's going to be a lot of mid and smaller size, or even a large size school that doesn't have a good balance sheet that go out of business, and they'll gobble up that market share. I think when you look over the long term, and probably probably the best example I can give is I remember in the 1980s being around the dinner table and my dad worked for Pontiac Motors from the time he got out of high school till he retired. And my dad saying Pontiac Motors is going to go under. And I panicked and I said, oh my gosh, are we going to be homeless? Is what I was thinking. But the reality is it took 20 years, right?
Right.
And I think that's the same thing. So realize when I say, I think I'll pick on University of Michigan. I was born in Detroit and I think they're a great school, but I did go to Michigan State. So I'll pick on University of Michigan. You may see in 20 years that they are not the giant, that there is a smaller school, and I'll support Concordia. Concordia is innovative and comes up with something and ends up being the next, powerhouse. We see this with GE, right? Go back 50 years ago, we would have said, well, GE is the greatest company ever. They've been around for 100 years. They're into everything. Jack Welch, holy cow, how's it getting better? And now I would be hard pressed to buy their stock. So I think you're seeing that change, and I'm wondering if COVID's the start of accelerating that.
Yeah. Another question around, obviously, I think you guys are still on an upward trajectory of enrollment, but do you see people taking more gap years in the United States, like taking that time off? Like one of the numbers that we were looking at was the gap year increased 294% last year of enrollment into that. What do you see? Like, I guess for enrollment, and I know there's that magic number year of like 2025. I can't remember the exact year where it just drops off because of sheer population. What is the university, or what would you recommend, or what is the university doing to look into that stuff? Is like, those are trends. How do we stay on top of them?
And this is great question again, and there is a cliff coming up with the undergrads. And so again, when you're looking at that traditional student that's 18 to 22, we know population demographics is just going to have to go off a cliff, and there's just going to be less of them. We know with COVID, look, those students are doing a lot of residential experience. Well, that makes it much more difficult than the husband or wife that's at home, right? They may have stress with the kids sitting there, but they're already at home. So for the graduate programs, we're not seeing the impact yet. I'm seeing, actually, I thought a lot would switch to online. We went to this face-to-face remote, so Zooming.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had really good surveys back, and we haven't seen a drop. But I think the undergrad schools, they're going to have real issues with the gap year and then the demographic cliff coming.
And then the question that we have is, what about like high school recruitment? If you're trying to recruit, how does that has to change significantly, in dealing with the undergrad, if you can't be in person or create these programs?
Right. And so now I'm outside my expertise because I don't do undergrad, but I'm always willing to comment on anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it does certainly change it. And before, and again, maybe this is a positive change in the long run. Before it was come to our school, we have a bowling alley, we have a restaurant, we have this, we have sports. And now think of the message that you really have to deliver to the students and the parents. Come to our school, we're safe, right? We've thought about you in a little bit more holistic approach versus kind of some of more of the, these casual things. So I think I'm not saying that's where we want to stay, but I'm hoping on the other side we come out of this and the sales pitch, if it has to be remote, is a little bit more about you, the student, and a little bit more about what's applicable right now and how we're going to get you a job and a vocation that you're going to make a difference in the world.
Um, any other questions? If you want to type it in the Q&A form or in the chat. Otherwise, I think that's all the questions we have right now. So, oh, here you got one right here, Brian. 1 second. The question is, do you see students being older after taking time to experience work world first?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been shifting to that. And again, everybody's path is different, so I can't tell, just broadly make a statement. But in particular for the MBA, when you get that job experience, it makes a difference when you're sitting in class and when you actually talk about hiring and firing and you've been in that. So yes, I'm seeing the students get a little bit older and lives are getting more complex. So that has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I almost think like, how does that change the employers and how they recruit talent? Where they have these massive recruiting arms in the colleges, but if people are older and they're remote, how does that change how you recruit your workforce too?
Right. And I think you're gonna, I'm hoping again out of this, you'll see some really creative things where companies, instead of doing this, we're going into colleges and we're doing a table and you're coming out, we're doing more internships. Students and programs like LinkedIn get more creative where we're actually posting up the projects that we've done. So instead of just, I have a bachelor's or I have an MBA, here's actually the work experience, the projects I've done real world, whether it's associated with the university, whether I did it on my own consulting, and hopefully employers start looking at that. And it's a more robust viewpoint than just having a degree.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Brian, for the presentation, and thank you for the guests for joining us. This will be recorded if you came in late. I know a few of you did, and you'll be able to view it on the Milwaukee YouTube page. And if you're interested in any of our other programs, go to milwaukee.com. We have all the listing of the upcoming web programs.